Hello everyone and welcome to my guide on soloing Elite Dungeon 3. In this guide, I'm going to cover how you solo Elite Dungeon 3 using the melee style, because that is the style I'm best at myself. I'm going to be covering not only how you get kills, but also some other tips and tricks that might make it a lot easier to get some kills. Before you attempt to do this dungeon solo, I highly recommend having a duo or a trio kill in order to have one kill count in order to be able to unlock the boss portal for the Shadow Reef in the War's Retreat or in the Max Guild. This will make it substantially easier to get back to the Elite Dungeon 3 or the Shadow Reef from the bank. Here's what I highly recommend before you attempt a solo ED3 run. 99 or better combat stats, 96 or better summoning in order to have access to using a yak as a familiar, Tier 90 or better melee weapons, Tier 80 or better melee armor, access to overloads, 95 or better prayer, and then the ancient curse is unlocked. It's very important that you have done a group run before you attempt soloing this dungeon, because you have to be fairly familiar with the mechanics, especially at the ambassador himself, or else you will probably not even be able to get a kill. It'll be very difficult, at least. Here's an inventory I would recommend when you're trying to get your first Elite Dungeon 3 runs done. You'd bring an overload, some prayer potions. I'd bring a Noxious Ice or actually a Dragon Rider Lance in order to help clear the mobs and for Crassian Leviathan, and for Terrakit. I'll explain why later. A Ring of Death to help lower the death costs a bit, an Adrenaline Potion in order to help do more damage to the bosses, and then a whole bunch of Sourdome and Brews and a whole bunch of food, because you're going to need it throughout the dungeon. For the recommended gear setup, I would bring the best melee armor you have, a pair of Drygors or Kopeshes, the best ring, the best amulet, and the best cape that you have available. You don't really need anything in your arrow slot, but you should bring the Vamparism scrimshaw because that'll make it substantially easier to get through both Terrakit and the ambassador. If you can, I'd recommend also getting a pair of laceration boots in order to not need a bladed dive switch throughout the dungeon. For the auras, I recommend using actually the Vampirism aura because it'll reduce the amount of food you need for both Terrakit and ambassador. In order to get to the Shadow Reef, you can teleport to it using a portal from the War's Retreat. You may need to retune one of the portals from War's Retreat to the Shadow Reef, but this should not cost anything, and as long as you have one or more kills even in group, you will be able to do this. I think that we have probably described what you need to do enough. Let's actually go get into the fight. The first part of this dungeon is actually quite simple. All you need to do is kill all the mobs you need in order to get the next barrier down. You'll have to do this until you get through to the Crassian Leviathan. You'll want to follow the path I'm using because there isn't really a lot of other paths you can go anyway. When you're not fighting a boss, focus on using as many area of effect abilities like Hurricane, Quake, and Meteor Strike in order to quickly destroy all of the mobs that are in your path. Just before the Crassian Leviathan is a chest that you can open to see what loot you have already gotten. If you have the option to bank at the chest, you can also choose to bank here if you need. You need to kill the 2 Cloaked Zealots up ahead, and then you're in the Crassian Leviathan fight. When you get to the Crassian Leviathan fight, you're going to want to go all the way right next to the boss and then move slightly to the right into max halberd range distance. You don't want to be within melee distance against this boss when Crassian Leviathan is going to do the huge breath and then the sweeping attacks, because you will not be safely able to stay in melee distance and without taking a huge amount of damage. The Crassian Leviathan has actually quite simple mechanics. It has a huge poison breath followed by some auto attacks, and then some head sweeps, followed by more auto attacks, followed by more head sweeps, and then more auto attacks. And then the Crassian Leviathan will then switch to the other side, and then repeat this whole ability rotation. Crassian Leviathan will do the head sweeps from either the left side or the right side. These head sweeps will go from said side until just a bit past the middle onto the other side. After this, if Crassian Leviathan swept from the left, Crassian Leviathan will then repeat the same mechanic except sweeping from the right. And of course, if Crassian Leviathan swept from the right, Crassian Leviathan will then sweep from the left. To tell where your character will need to go in order to avoid the head sweeps, watch where Crassian Leviathan initially swings his head. When Crassian Leviathan initially swings his head to the left, your character should immediately move to the right and wait until the head sweep from the left finishes, and then immediately move to the left because the head sweep from the right is going to follow up immediately. You do the opposite if Crassian Leviathan swings his head to the right, so then you move your character immediately to the left and then wait for Crassian Leviathan to finish the right side head sweep, and then move your character to the right in order to dodge the left side head sweep. If your character is already on the opposite side of the head sweep, then you won't need to worry about the first head sweep, but you will need to move to the opposite side on the other head sweep. After the second set of head sweep attacks that Crassian Leviathan does on your side, you're going to keep damaging Crassian Leviathan until it moves to the other side. It will retract into the side it's on, and then it will pop out onto the other side. You'll want to bladed dive and surge across the field in order to avoid getting stun locked in the middle of the field by the green pools. If you get stun locked, free them and then keep going until you get to the end, and then move to the side in order to avoid getting hit by the poison breath. Then you continue dealing with the boss as usual. If you can deal with the head sweeps and the poison breath effectively, then you should be fairly easily able to get a kill. You'll only need to capsule split. The auto attacks do very little damage, but you will want to use weapon poison of some kind, either through Cinderbane gloves or weapon poison potions, in order to substantially reduce the amount of healing that Crassian Leviathan is capable of doing. This boss has quite a lot of defense, so don't be surprised if you see a lot of splashing throughout the fight. But that's not a big deal, you should be able to get through it anyway. When you finish Crassian Leviathan, keep going through the dungeon until you get to this drop-off point. Kill all the mobs there, except the summoned skeletons, and then turn to the right and go into the large circular area. Kill one of the necromancers and the armored zombies in front of the door, and then go through the door. When you get through the door, there's going to be a chest to your left. Your character can open that chest and bank at it if you need, or your character can teleport out of the dungeon and then return to that chest by teleporting using the chests, if you need to bank that way as well. You can also check your loot if you'd like. To continue on with the dungeon, there are two paths that you need to go through. You can take the right or the left first, but you need to kill the necromancer at the door, and then flip the switch of the room of the necromancer that you killed, and then go to the other side and kill that necromancer, and also flip that switch in that room. That will open the barrier to the bridge, which is where you will need to go next. The bridge is a place which is quite dangerous, thus your character will not want to spend a lot of time there. Pre-arrange as you go through the bridge, but only kill the two sea horrors and the necromancer. In order to reduce the damage you take from the sea horrors, you can use a Witchwood icon, but I actually think you should go all the way into one of the corners as far up the bridge as you can, in order to only allow one of the sea horrors to hit you. Kill the sea horrors, and then you can kill the necromancer, and then you can immediately move on from that part. After the bridge, take the left path and kill the 3 elite Zontapanas at the barrier. Run along until you find the next barrier, which will also have a chest next to it, and kill all the mobs you need there until the barrier drops. After that, you can teleport out in order to remove the rest of the mobs. You'll be able to teleport back to this chest after you have restocked. I highly recommend starting the next boss fight with 100% adrenaline, so if you want, you can definitely teleport out here, and I do myself, generally, in my runs. The second boss is Terrakit the Necromancer. Terrakit is a boss your character will want to do relatively quickly, so make sure that you start Terrakit with 100% adrenaline if you can. You also will want to turn on the Vamparism scrimshaw here because it is very easy for this boss to take a lot of food. Terrakit will mainly attack with magic attacks. However, if you see a death swiftness around Terrakit, Terrakit will be attacking your character with ranged attacks. You're going to basically pray magic unless Terrakit spawns a death swiftness, and then you'll switch to ranged prey until the death swiftness disappears, or you see a fiery attack from Terrakit. You're going to want to damage Terrakit until he spawns a portal, and then your character will want to kill the portals. As the portals get to lower health, you'll want to use abilities like Hurricane or Quake in order to remove all the skeletons around the portals, and kill the portals at the same time, preventing the portals from spawning more skeletons. You want to keep the number of skeletons relatively low in order to prevent Terrakit from uber healing a lot of health by absorbing the skeletons. Don't worry if there's a few skeletons though, because Terrakit will not heal that much from it. Once you kill the portals, keep damaging Terrakit until he gets to 200,000 HP. At 200,000 HP, Terrakit will generally move to the right and then spawn the bloated monstrosity. However, if your character moves Terrakit to the left at any point before the 200,000 HP hits, Terrakit will instead spawn the corpse carrier and move to the left. Either situation, Terrakit is also going to heal about 100,000 HP as well as spawn the big skeleton. There is no way to prevent Terrakit from healing this 100,000 HP. If you're learning, I highly recommend killing the big skeleton before you get back onto Terrakit. However, if any portals spawn, kill the portals first and then get back on the big skeleton. You have to take extra care when the corpse carrier spawns to make sure you clear a lot of the skeletons around the corpse carrier, or else Terrakit will be able to uber heal from the skeletons. Also, these skeletons do a pretty decent amount of damage too, so your character will probably need to eat a lot of food during this time. Once you kill the first large skeleton, you can DPS Terrakit to 200,000 HP, and Terrakit will spawn the other large skeleton that hasn't been spawned yet, and then heal 100,000 HP again. Again, kill this skeleton as well, and then kill any portals that spawn unless Terrakit is less than, I believe, 50,000 HP. During this time, Terrakit can spawn ghost walls. If they spawn right in front of you, your character should surge in the direction that the ghost walls are going and then move away from them after getting a bit of distance between your character and the ghost walls. However, if the ghost walls spawn directly on top of your character should move through the ghost walls immediately in order to not take any damage. This boss is kind of a lot to handle, so take it slowly. You can focus on doing one thing at a time and making sure your character is praying the right thing, and then you should be able to get a kill, even though there is quite a lot of mechanics to this boss. Eventually, Terrakit's HP will get to 0, and you will finish the fight. After you finish off Terrakit, you can teleport out if your character has no supplies, or your character can move on. Your character will want to pray magic against any mobs that include a undead witch or a warped skeleton, because those mobs do a lot of damage. Everything else your character can pray soul split against. Again, your character should run along, jump down the abyss, and then keep running along until your character gets to the last chest. Watch out for any mini-bosses just before the last chest though, because these mini-bosses can do very strong magic attacks and stun your character. After you kill the 2 warped skeletons and the 2 Crassian scouts near the chest and the barrier, your character can teleport out, leaving behind any of the mini-bosses and any other mobs that may be attacking your character at the time. The mini-bosses will spawn back to where they were before, so if your character wants to fight the mini-bosses or build adrenaline on the mini-bosses, your character can do that after coming back in to the fight. Let's move on to the most difficult and frustrating part of the dungeon, fighting the Ambassador. Ambassador has 1 million life points and has 3 phases. We'll start with phase 1. On phase 1, Ambassador is going to immediately magic attack your character, and then do 5 auto attacks, and then he'll do a smoke attack, 5 more auto attacks, spawn a black hole attack, 5 auto attacks, spawn the smoke attack again, 5 auto attacks, and then Ambassador will spawn the Sinister Fragments. For the magic attack, Ambassador will send a slow-moving blue cloud towards your character. If this hits your character unprotected, your character will take between 4,000 and 5,000 damage. Your character should normally pray magic, although it can also resonance the magic attack in order to get a 4,000 to 5,000 heal. Immediately after your character gets hit by the magic attack, your character should switch to ranged in order to defend against the incoming normal auto attacks. For the auto attacks, Ambassador is going to mainly attack with ranged, although after 5 ranged auto attacks, he will attack your character with melee if your character is within melee distance, but if your character is outside of melee distance, he will attack your character with magic instead. Again, you can resonance or use a defensive ability or switch to magic prey if your character gets the magic attack, but it is very difficult to see the melee attack coming, so if you want to do the same with the melee attack, you'll have to count the ranged auto attacks. For the smoke attack, your character will get a blue adrenaline bar above your head, similar to that of the Sanctum Guardian from Elite Dungeon 1. Your character should probably wait until the smoke bar is about a last quarter, and then bladed dive backwards a bit in order to give your character plenty of room around the Ambassador to continue attacking the boss after the smoke attack happens. Wait a second until after the smoke has spawned, and then get back on the boss, in order to not accidentally spread the smoke to the boss itself, because that will cause many problems later on in the fight. Do not walk back into the smoke either, because it will do about 2,000 damage a tick to your character if your character walks back in later on. The next attack is the black hole attack. Your character should get to the black hole as quickly as possible and use an ability that stuns the black hole, such as backhand, kick, forceful backhand, destroy, or stomp. After you stun the black hole will immediately disappear, and then your character can go back to the boss fight as usual. If you don't want to stun the black hole, you have a second option. You can wait until the black hole is in the last 1/8 of its blue adrenaline bar, and then you can drink a power burst of vitality in order to double your HP. Because the power burst of vitality doubles your HP and then halves it again, you'll effectively take half damage from the black hole, in basically significantly reducing the damage you would take from that attack. Some people also use Reprisal in order to reflect the damage that you took from Ambassador and give it back to the Ambassador himself. There are no abilities, though, aside from Barricade, that actually reduce the damage that you would take from the black hole otherwise. With the Sinister Fragment attack, Ambassador will stop attacking your character and then shoot out 6 Sinister Fragments. Your goal is to kill as many of these Sinister Fragments as possible. You probably want to try to kill at least 4 of them though, because fewer of them will result in having a lot of difficulty actually defending against all the upcoming explosions that'll happen later. When Ambassador stops attacking your character, you will want to stop attacking Ambassador because you will not be able to do any damage to him, and then move to the south and attack the spinner that is on the right, because that is the first Sinister Fragment that your character will have a decent amount of time to actually attack. For Sinister Fragments, your character will want to use roughly 1 or 2 thresholds per Sinister Fragment in order to efficiently get rid of the Sinister Fragments without wasting Adrenaline or Threshold abilities. For Sinister Fragments your character uses Destroy or Assault on, you should only need to use 1 threshold. However, Sinister Fragments that you don't get to use either of those 2, you'll need to either use a combination of Slaughter and Kick on the Sinister Fragment, followed by probably a Blood Tendrils, allowing your character to move on from that Sinister Fragment before actually killing it, because the bleeds will do that for you, or using a multitude of other thresholds in order to make sure that you get that Sinister Fragment down. You should try to aim for 4 because that is a relatively achievable amount of Sinister Fragments to do. 3 or less Sinister Fragments is going to be very difficult for your character to defend against later. When Ambassador reabsorbs the Sinister Fragments, he's going to do an explosion for each of the Sinister Fragments he gets to absorb, including any low health ones that were about to die like just a moment later. So, you're going to need to use defensive abilities per Sinister Fragment in order to not take huge amounts of damage from these upcoming explosions. My recommendation is you use Debilitate for the first one if you don't have Disruption Shield, and for the second explosion you use Resonance. If there is 3 or more Sinister Fragments absorbed, I highly recommend teleporting out because I think your character is going to have a hard time dealing with 3 explosions. Although, if you want to stay in the fight at the time, you can use Debilitate and Reflect with a shield on to defend against 2 of the explosions. You can use Barricade to also defend against 2 of the explosions, and then Resonance and Disruption Shield will defend against an explosion each. You can also use a Power Burst of Vitality to help defend against these. The Sinister Fragments is actually one of the most difficult parts of this whole fight, so you may need to practice this a bit before you actually are able to get a kill. Phase 1 is actually by far the most difficult of the phases, and it will end when your character manages to get Ambassador down to 550,000 HP. For this phase, the most important thing is kind of just practicing dealing with the mechanics, and not taking too long dealing with either the smoke attack or the black hole attack, and minimizing the amount of food you take during this phase. I will actually recommend making sure that you have tons of food throughout this phase, and using the Vamparism Scrimshaw Aura in order to minimize the amount of food you actually need to use while bringing the most possible in order to allow you to last the longest at this fight. You should hopefully be able to get this done in at most 4-ish cycles of spinner attacks, although you're going to have a very tough time if you have that many. So try to focus on having good DPS during this phase. If you're able to get past phase 1 at the Ambassador, you're going to probably be eventually able to get a kill, because phase 2 and phase 3 are far easier to do than phase 1. We'll move on to phase 2. On phase 2, you just need to do some damage. Ambassador will spawn these Crassian Ritual Keepers that will do some range damage to your character, but after the set of black holes and smoke attacks that he had to carry over from the previous phase, the Ambassador will not do any more special attacks. At 400,000 HP, Syria will appear, and then a few seconds later, heal all the characters in the arena to full HP. Then, a few seconds later, Siryu will do a huge breath, quickly eliminating all of the Crassian Ritual Keepers and all the smoke from the battlefield. Then we'll move on to Phase 3. On Phase 3, Ambassador's going to start by spawning a huge amount of hands around the arena. Each of these hands will then shoot a white cloud at Ambassador, healing him for 2500 health each. He's then going to have one of the hands slam down on the ground and start shooting clouds at the Ambassador. It is important that you stand between the hand shooting clouds at the Ambassador and the Ambassador so that the clouds stay black, because white clouds will heal the Ambassador by 2,500 each cloud. Black clouds will do roughly 200 damage to your character each cloud, which will be substantially better than the 2500 health that Ambassador heals each cloud. The hands that shoot clouds at Ambassador will move in a clockwise rotation, so it's highly recommended that you slowly move around the Ambassador, blocking the hands in order to reduce the amount of chance that Ambassador gets to heal. It is very important that you deal with this attack correctly, or else you may never be able to finish the boss fight, because Ambassador will simply heal far more than your character will be able to damage. The Magic Onslaught attack will happen every 30 seconds from the start of the Phase 3. Ambassador will call your name above his head, and then shoot a large amount of black energy at your character. Each of these hits will do 8,000 damage, and there's going to be 5 of them. For the first Magic Onslaught attack, I highly recommend using Devotion and praying magic quickly before the magic attack hits you. Every other Magic Onslaught attack you should be able to use Devotion to protect against. However, the other Magic Onslaught attacks, you probably will need to use Reflect and Debilitate and pray magic, or you can use Debilitate or Reflect and then drink the Power Burst of Vitality, and it will achieve the same effect. Important that you have this ready around the time the Magic Onslaught is coming, or else you may get killed almost instantly by at least one of these magic attacks. The easiest way to tell when these magic attacks happen is look at your Devotion timer. If it's off of cooldown and you've already used the Devotion against one of these Magic Onslaught attacks, then the Magic Onslaught attack is literally about to happen. However, if it's on 30 seconds on cooldown, there's also going to be a Magic Onslaught attack about to happen. So make sure you pay close attention to the cooldown on your Devotion here. If you do the Magic Onslaught and the Black Hand correctly, you should be eventually able to kill, even if it takes a long time. Just take it slow and make sure you do not panic, and focus on not allowing Ambassador to heal too much and not getting destroyed by the Magic Onslaught attack, even if you take a lot of damage from the auto attacks. When you get Ambassador's HP to 0, he will die, although he will make some mentions about how the Zootalk character will eventually kill your character, blah 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 blah. Don't worry about that too much, that's just flavor text. The loot from Ambassador will go into your Elite Dungeon chest unless you toggled the chest off just before you fought Ambassador. The normal drops you get from Ambassador are roughly between 500,000 and 3 million gold. However, the Ambassador can drop Eldritch Crossbow pieces. There is an Eldritch Crossbow mechanism, an Eldritch Crossbow stock, and an Eldritch Crossbow limbs, and you need one of each in order to create an Eldritch Crossbow itself. The Eldritch Crossbow goes for above a max cash stack, or 2.147 billion gold. So each Eldritch Crossbow piece is worth between 700 and 800 million gold. And in solos, there is a 1 in 55 probability of getting this, which means actually each Ambassador kill is worth around 15 to 18 million gold an hour, roughly. If you get Eldritch Crossbow pieces roughly around the drop rate, and you can get up to 2 kills an hour, that means you can make between 30 and 36 million gold an hour. However, some people can even do 4 runs an hour, which means they can make between 60 and 72 million gold an hour just from doing Elite Dungeon 3 runs. Elite Dungeon 3 is definitely one of the most profitable ways to make money in the game, assuming you get reasonably lucky, although there have been many people who have went more than 100 kills or even 200 kills dry on Eldritch Crossbow pieces. So, unfortunately, it is quite common to not get an Eldritch Crossbow piece for a long time. But when you do, you get a ton of money anyway. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is not going to be an easy thing to do, and it may take many attempts before you get it, but I hope this guide at least helps you get your first kill, and maybe helps you get more consistent kills as well. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment what you learned if you did learn anything, and subscribe to the channel. I'll probably be releasing more guides in the future. Thank you, and bye.